That Wednesday morning in November, when I walked into Clearwater Manor Nursing Home to sign what I believed were standard care upgrade forms for my mother, I thought I was doing the right thing. Have you ever had that sinking feeling in your gut that something was terribly wrong, but everyone around you kept insisting everything was fine? I'm Dorothy Miller, 63 years old, and I've spent the last 40 years as a high school mathematics teacher in Toronto. My mother, Eleanor, was 81 and had been living at Clearwater Manor for 8 months after her Alzheimer's diagnosis made it impossible for her to stay alone. The facility came highly recommended, with gleaming hallways, cheerful staff, and a price tag that made my retirement savings wince every month. But Mother deserved the best care, especially after Dad passed 3 years ago. The call came at 7 in the morning. Mrs. Miller, this is Director Melissa Harrington from Clearwater Manor. We need to discuss your mother's care plan urgently. Can you come in this morning? We have some papers that require your immediate signature. Something in her voice made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling aside. Is Mother all right? Has something happened? She's stable, but her condition has deteriorated significantly. We really need you here as soon as possible. The line went dead before I could ask more questions. I threw on my coat, hands shaking as I fumbled with the buttons. The drive from my house in Scarborough to the nursing home in Mississauga usually took 40 minutes, but I made it in 30, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Had Mother fallen again? Was she refusing to eat? The staff had mentioned some behavioral issues last month, but nothing that seemed serious. Clearwater Manor sat at the end of a quiet street, its modern glass exterior reflecting the gray November sky. I'd always thought it looked more like a boutique hotel than a nursing home, which had been part of its appeal. Inside, the lobby smelled of lavender and fresh coffee, classical music playing softly through hidden speakers. The receptionist, a young woman named Paula, whom I recognized from previous visits, gave me a tight smile and immediately picked up the phone. "Mrs. Miller is here," she said quietly, then nodded toward the hallway. "Director Harrington is waiting for you in conference room B, down the hall, third door on your left." I walked past the common room where residents usually gathered for morning activities. It was oddly quiet. A few elderly people sat in wheelchairs near the window, but the usual buzz of conversation and laughter was absent. One woman caught my eye and quickly looked away, her expression troubled. Director Harrington stood as I entered the conference room. She was in her late 40s, with perfect auburn hair and a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Mrs. Miller, thank you for coming so quickly. Please, sit down." A folder lay on the polished oak table between us. She opened it, revealing multiple forms with small print and highlighted signature lines. "I'll get straight to the point. Your mother's cognitive decline has accelerated dramatically over the past 3 weeks. She's become combative with staff, refusing medications, experiencing severe confusion and agitation. We believe she needs to be transferred to our specialized memory care unit." Memory care unit? You never mentioned that before. I thought this facility already specialized in Alzheimer's care. It does, but this is an intensive program for advanced cases. 24-hour monitoring, specialized medication protocols, enhanced security. It's the best care available in the Greater Toronto Area. She slid the papers toward me. The cost is $11,000 per month, but given your mother's rapid decline, it's absolutely necessary. $11,000. That was nearly double what I was already paying. "Can I see her first? I'd like to assess her condition myself." Director Harrington's smile tightened. "She's sedated right now. We had an incident this morning where she became quite violent. It's better if we get this paperwork handled, and then you can see her once she's calmer. Time is really of the essence here, Mrs. Miller. Every hour we delay appropriate treatment puts your mother and our staff at risk." I reached for the pen she offered, my hand hovering over the signature line. The facility's letterhead swam before my eyes. $11,000. Where would I even find that money? But what choice did I have, if Mother was truly deteriorating that quickly? The door opened suddenly, and a woman in janitorial coveralls backed into the room pulling a cleaning cart. "Oh, excuse me, I thought this room was empty," she said, then seemed to stumble, knocking over a waste bin that rolled toward my feet. Carmen, we're in the middle of a private meeting, Director Harrington snapped, standing abruptly. The woman, Carmen, bent down to retrieve the bin, and as she did, she pressed something small into my hand under the table. Her eyes, dark and intense, met mine for just a second. So sorry, she muttered in accented English, quickly gathering her cart and leaving. I looked down. In my palm was a folded piece of paper no bigger than a business card. My heart started pounding as I discreetly unfolded it under the table. Don't sign anything. Your mother is being drugged. Room 7B, storage closet. Midnight tonight. Come alone. Please trust me. You're her only hope. I must have made some sound because Director Harrington leaned forward. Mrs. Miller, are you all right? You've gone quite pale. I crumpled the note in my fist, forcing my voice to remain steady. I'm sorry. I just feel quite overwhelmed. This is a lot to process. Could I possibly have a few hours to think it over? Perhaps consult with my financial advisor? Her expression hardened slightly. Every hour matters, Mrs. Miller. Your mother attacked one of our nurses this morning. We could face liability issues if she hurts someone, and we haven't taken appropriate precautions. I really must insist we handle this now. I understand, but $11,000 is a significant commitment. Surely a few hours won't make that much difference? I'd like to see Mother, even if she's sedated, and I'll come back this afternoon to sign. Director Harrington's jaw tightened, but she nodded curtly. Very well, but I cannot guarantee her safety or the safety of our staff if she has another violent episode before we implement the new care protocol. Room 312, third floor. I'll have Nurse Brandon escort you. Nurse Brandon turned out to be a muscular man in his 30s with cold blue eyes and a smile that never reached them. Right this way, Mrs. Miller. Your mother's resting comfortably. We took the elevator in silence. The third floor was quieter than the lobby, with muted beige walls and the antiseptic smell of industrial cleaner covering something else, something sour. Several residents sat in wheelchairs along the corridor, most of them staring blankly at nothing. One woman's wrist had a dark bruise that looked fresh. Here we are. Brandon unlocked the door with a key card. 15 minutes, then I'll need to get her ready for her afternoon medications. Mother lay in the hospital bed, so small and frail she barely made an impression under the white sheets. Her silver hair, always so carefully styled, was matted against her head. An IV drip ran into her arm, and her breathing seemed shallow. But what struck me most was how pale she looked, almost gray. Mother? I approached the bed carefully, taking her hand. It was cold. Mother, it's Dorothy. Can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. There was a bruise on her forearm near the IV site and another on her cheek. My chest tightened with anger. What happened to her face? Brandon, who'd been standing in the doorway, shrugged. Like Director Harrington told you, she had an episode this morning, tried to fight off the orderlies when we were administering her medication. We had to restrain her for everyone's safety. I looked at my mother, this woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me to read, who'd held my hand through my divorce, who'd never raised her voice or her hand to anyone in her life. The woman they claimed had become violent and combative. I'll be back this afternoon, I said quietly, squeezing Mother's hand one last time. The rest of the day crawled by in agonizing slowness. I went home, unable to focus on anything except that crumpled note in my pocket and the bruises on my mother's face. At 7 that evening, I drove back to Clearwater Manor, but parked 3 blocks away. The November darkness came early, and by the time I approached the building's side entrance at 11:45, the street was deserted. The door was locked, but as I stood there wondering what to do, it opened from the inside. Carmen, the janitor, stood there in her coveralls, face tight with fear. Quickly, come inside. No one uses this entrance at night. She led me through a maintenance corridor that smelled of bleach and floor polish. We passed storage rooms and a commercial laundry facility before reaching a small supply closet marked 7B. Inside, the space was cramped, barely big enough for both of us among the shelves of cleaning supplies. "Why did you warn me?" I whispered. Carmen's hands shook as she pulled out her phone. "Because I have a mother too. And because I've watched this place destroy 12 people in the 6 months I've worked here, and I can't stay silent anymore." She swiped through her photo gallery. I started taking pictures 3 months ago when I realized what was happening. Look, the first photo showed a medication chart for a resident named James Whitmore. Multiple drugs I didn't recognize, administered 4 times daily. Haloperidol, risperidone, lorazepam, Carmen whispered. Heavy psychiatric drugs. But look at the date he was admitted. The intake form showed James had arrived at Clearwater Manor with mild dementia, fully mobile, capable of feeding himself. Now look at him 2 months later. The next photo made my stomach turn. James in a wheelchair, head lolling to one side, drool on his chin, eyes vacant and unfocused. They drug them, Carmen said, her voice breaking. They tell the families the patients are getting worse, deteriorating rapidly, need specialized care, more money, always more money. But it's the drugs making them worse. The more medication they give, the more the patients decline, the more expensive care they need. It's a cycle. That's insane. Why would they do that? Money. She showed me more photos. Director Harrington has contracts with North Star Pharmaceuticals. She gets paid for every prescription written, bonuses for the expensive drugs. And the intensive memory care unit? It's just a locked ward where they keep patients so drugged they can barely function. Easier to manage, more profitable. The families pay $18,000 a month for that unit. My blood ran cold. 18? She told me 11. That's just the starting price. It goes up after the first month. Most families can't afford to pull their loved ones out by then, and the patients are so heavily medicated they can't even communicate what's happening to them. I thought of Mother's gray face, her shallow breathing, the bruises, the violent episodes, fake, or caused by medication side effects. Your mother tried to refuse her pills this morning, so Nurse Brandon held her down and forced them into her mouth. When she struggled, he called it a violent episode. That's how he gets his bonus, $500 for every patient transferred to intensive care. I need proof, something I can take to the authorities. Carmen nodded, pulling a USB drive from her pocket. 6 months of photos, videos, medication charts, financial documents I copied from Director Harrington's office. Intake assessments compared to current conditions. It's all here. I also know where they keep the security footage. There are cameras in the medication rooms that record everything, but the families never see it. Why haven't you gone to the police yourself? Her eyes filled with tears. I'm not a citizen. I have a work visa. If I report this, they'll destroy me, get me deported. Director Harrington knows people in immigration. She's threatened me before when I asked questions. But you're a citizen. You have rights. You have your mother to fight for. Please, you have to be the one to do this. I took the USB drive with shaking hands. I need to get her out of here tonight. You can't. Not without signing discharge papers, and Director Harrington will never approve that now. She knows you're suspicious. But if you go to the police first thing tomorrow with this evidence, they can get a warrant. Adult Protective Services can remove all the patients immediately. What about tonight? Mother's alone with these people. Carmen reached into her pocket again, pulling out a small pill bottle. These are your mother's actual medications from before she came here. I found her old prescriptions in her intake file. Just blood pressure and cholesterol medicine. I've been keeping them safe. I'll go to her room after my shift ends at 1 a.m. and swap out her IV bag with normal saline. It won't help her recover immediately, but it'll stop them from drugging her more tonight. They'll see you on the cameras. The camera in that hallway has been broken for 2 weeks. They're too cheap to fix it. She smiled grimly. That's how I've been able to document so much. We spent another 20 minutes going through the evidence on the USB drive. Photos of medication charts showing massive doses of sedatives and antipsychotics prescribed to patients whose intake forms showed only mild cognitive decline. Videos recorded on Carmen's phone of Nurse Brandon roughly handling patients, forcing pills down their throats, mocking residents who couldn't speak coherently anymore. Financial documents showing Director Harrington's income had tripled in the past year, with monthly payments from North Star Pharmaceuticals labeled as consulting fees. There's 12 residents currently in this program, Carmen explained. Your mother just started, so she's not as bad as the others yet. But James Whitmore, Patricia Chen, Robert Morrison, they've been here 6 months or more. They're shadows of who they were. Their families visit and cry and pay more money, and the whole time Harrington is killing them slowly. Why North Star Pharmaceuticals? What do they get out of this? Data. They're testing new formulations of these drugs, studying long-term effects, dosage impacts. Clearwater Manor is basically a human testing facility, but none of the families gave consent. North Star pays Harrington for access to the patients and their medical data. It's all in the documents. By the time I left through the maintenance entrance at 12:30, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I drove home and spent the next 4 hours going through every file on that USB drive, my horror growing with each document. Carmen had been meticulous, dating and labeling everything. There were even audio recordings she'd made of Director Harrington on the phone with someone at North Star, discussing optimal dosage levels for sustained cognitive decline and increasing the patient pool. At 6 a.m., I called the Toronto Police Service non-emergency line. I need to report elder abuse and fraud at a nursing home. I have extensive documentation. They connected me to a detective named Sarah Kowalski, who specialized in vulnerable persons cases. How extensive is extensive? 6 months of photos, videos, financial records, and medication charts showing systematic drugging of elderly patients for profit. There was a pause. Where are you right now? At home in Scarborough. Stay there. I'm coming to you. Detective Kowalski arrived 45 minutes later with a partner, Detective James Bradford. I made coffee while they sat at my kitchen table, reviewing the USB drive on a laptop. The sun was coming up, pale winter light streaming through my windows, but I felt cold to my bones. Jesus Christ? Detective Bradford muttered, staring at a video of Nurse Brandon shoving pills into an elderly woman's mouth while she cried and tried to turn away. How long has this been going on? According to the documentation, at least 2 years. But Carmen, the woman who gave me this evidence, has only been working there 6 months. Who knows what happened before that? Detective Kowalski's jaw was tight. We need to move fast. If Director Harrington suspects anything, she could destroy evidence or harm the patients. Mrs. Miller, I need you to call the nursing home right now. Tell them you've decided to sign the papers, that you'll be there at 9 a.m. Act completely normal. My hand shook as I dialed the number. Director Harrington answered on the second ring, voice crisp and professional. Mrs. Miller, I'm so glad you called. Have you made a decision? Yes. I've reviewed my finances. I can make the intensive care arrangement work. I'll be there at 9 to sign the papers. Excellent choice. Your mother will receive the best possible care. I'll have everything ready. I hung up and looked at the detectives. Now what? Now we get warrants. Detective Kowalski was already on her phone, and we coordinate with Adult Protective Services, the College of Nurses, and the Medical Licensing Board. We're going to shut this place down today. The next 3 hours were a blur of phone calls and planning. A judge approved emergency warrants for Clearwater Manor's premises, financial records, and medical files. Adult Protective Services assembled a team to assess and relocate the affected residents. An ambulance service was put on standby. The police coordinated with York Regional Police since the nursing home was technically in their jurisdiction. At 8:45, I drove to Clearwater Manor with Detective Kowalski in the passenger seat and Detective Bradford following in an unmarked car. 3 more police vehicles were staged a block away, along with 2 ambulances and an Adult Protective Services van. Remember, act completely normal, Detective Kowalski said as we pulled into the parking lot. We'll be listening. She tapped the small microphone clipped to my collar under my sweater. Get her talking. Get her to confirm the intensive care unit protocol. We need her on record. My legs felt like rubber as I walked through those gleaming glass doors. Paula, the receptionist, smiled. Good morning, Mrs. Miller. Director Harrington is expecting you. Director Harrington rose from behind her desk as I entered her office, hand extended. Mrs. Miller, I'm so pleased you've chosen to proceed with the intensive care program. Your mother's welfare is our top priority. I sat down, trying to keep my voice steady. Before I sign, I'd like to understand exactly what medications Mother will receive in this program. You mentioned specialized protocols? Of course. We use a combination of mood stabilizers, anti-anxiety medications, and cognitive enhancers. The exact formulations are proprietary to our facility, developed in consultation with leading pharmaceutical companies. Which companies? Her smile flickered. Primarily North Star Pharmaceuticals. They're at the forefront of Alzheimer's research. And these medications? They're FDA approved? They're part of ongoing research trials. Your mother would be contributing to cutting-edge science while receiving the most advanced care available. But she'd be a test subject, without giving consent, since she can't. Director Harrington's expression hardened. Mrs. Miller, if you have concerns, perhaps this isn't the right fit. I should tell you that if you choose not to proceed, I'll have to ask you to remove your mother from Clearwater Manor entirely. Her violent behaviors pose too great a risk to our staff and other residents. The violent behaviors that only started after she came here? After you started giving her medication she didn't need? The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're implying. I'm implying that you've been systematically drugging elderly patients to create dependency on expensive care programs. I'm implying that you have contracts with North Star Pharmaceuticals to use vulnerable seniors as test subjects without consent. I'm implying that you're committing fraud, elder abuse, and possibly manslaughter. Director Harrington stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This meeting is over. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately, and I'll be consulting with our lawyers about your slanderous accusations. The door burst open. Detective Kowalski entered with her badge held high, followed by 4 uniformed officers. Melissa Harrington, you're under arrest for fraud, elder abuse, administering harmful substances, and criminal conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. The next several hours were controlled chaos. Police flooded through Clearwater Manor, securing evidence and taking statements. Adult Protective Services workers assessed each resident in the suspected program. Ambulances transported the 12 victims to Toronto General Hospital for medical evaluation and detoxification from the unnecessary drugs. I found Carmen in a supply closet, crying with relief. Is it over? It's over. Thank you for being brave enough to document everything. Mother was transferred to Toronto General in the 2nd ambulance. I rode with her, holding her hand while a paramedic checked her vital signs. She's heavily sedated, but nothing that won't clear her system in 48 to 72 hours, he said. We'll monitor her closely. Nurse Brandon was arrested trying to flee through a back exit. Security footage later showed him deleting files from the medication room computers, but tech forensics recovered everything. Director Harrington's office yielded boxes of financial records, patient files with falsified assessments, and contracts with North Star Pharmaceuticals that explicitly outlined using Clearwater Manor residents for unauthorized drug trials. The story broke on the 6 o'clock news that evening. Toronto nursing home shut down in elder abuse investigation. By the next morning, it was national news. Families of former Clearwater Manor residents came forward with their own horror stories. A woman named Patricia Chen's daughter showed reporters photos of her mother before and after 6 months at Clearwater, the deterioration shocking and heartbreaking. Over the next 3 weeks, as mother slowly recovered in the hospital, the full scope of the conspiracy emerged. Melissa Harrington had started the scheme 18 months ago after being approached by a North Star Pharmaceuticals executive named Gregory Marshall. They'd identified Clearwater Manor as an ideal testing facility because it served wealthy families who could afford to pay escalating care costs without questioning too closely. The drug trials were testing new formulations of psychiatric medications specifically designed for elderly patients with dementia. But instead of recruiting willing participants through proper channels, they decided to use patients who couldn't consent, falsifying their conditions to justify the medications. The plan was to gather data quickly, patent the successful formulations, and profit from a multi-billion-dollar market. North Star paid Harrington $50,000 per month, plus bonuses for each patient enrolled in the trials. Nurse Brandon received $500 for every patient transferred to intensive care. Other staff members had been paid smaller amounts for their silence or cooperation. Of the 12 victims, Mother was the most recent and least affected. After 3 weeks of hospital care and proper medication management, she regained most of her cognitive function. I knew something was wrong, she told me weakly from her hospital bed. I tried to tell them I didn't need all those pills, but they'd hold me down. I thought I was going crazy. You weren't crazy, Mother. You were being drugged. James Whitmore, the man Carmen had shown me in those devastating photos, required 2 months of intensive care to recover. The neurologist said he'd likely never regain full cognitive function after being on such high doses of psychiatric medication for so long. His daughter filed a $20 million lawsuit against Clearwater Manor and North Star Pharmaceuticals. Patricia Chen died 3 weeks after the rescue. The medical examiner determined that months of unnecessary medication had caused irreversible organ damage. Her death changed the charges against Harrington and Marshall from elder abuse to manslaughter. The trial took place 8 months later. I testified about the day Carmen gave me that warning, about finding Mother Gray and barely conscious in that room, about the pressure to sign away her care to a program that would have killed her. Carmen testified despite her fear, her visa status protected under whistleblower laws. Families of the other victims filled the courtroom, many of them crying as they heard the full details of what had been done to their loved ones. The evidence was overwhelming. Melissa Harrington was convicted on 43 counts, including fraud, elder abuse, administering noxious substances, criminal conspiracy, and manslaughter in Patricia Chen's death. She received 18 years in prison. Nurse Brandon got 12 years. Gregory Marshall from North Star Pharmaceuticals received 20 years, and the company faced hundreds of millions in fines and civil settlements. Carmen was granted permanent residency in Canada based on her whistleblower status and her crucial role in exposing the conspiracy. The Ontario government used her as a case study in their new nursing home oversight reforms. She enrolled in college to become a licensed practical nurse, determined to provide the kind of care she'd seen so desperately lacking. Mother moved into a small apartment near my house after her recovery. We hired a home care aide to check on her daily, but she regained her independence and most of her memory. She couldn't recall much from her time at Clearwater Manor, which the doctors said was probably a mercy. We had lunch together last Tuesday at her favorite cafe on Queen Street. Over chicken salad, sandwiches, and tea, she squeezed my hand and said, "You saved my life. If you'd signed those papers," I almost did. If Carmen hadn't warned me, if she hadn't risked everything to document what was happening, I would have signed. I would have paid them $11,000 a month to kill you slowly. But you listened to your instincts. You knew something was wrong. She was right. I had known, on some level. That sinking feeling in my gut when Director Harrington pressured me to sign immediately, the wrongness of Mother's condition, the too-perfect facility that hid such darkness. I'd almost ignored those instincts, almost let authority and fear override my own judgment. The regulatory changes that followed the Clearwater Manor case were extensive. Ontario implemented mandatory external audits of nursing homes, random inspections of medication protocols, and independent patient advocates for residents with cognitive impairments. Families gained rights to access security footage and medical records without facility approval. Whistleblower protections were strengthened, particularly for immigrant workers. But I know that for every Clearwater Manor that gets exposed, there might be others still operating. Elder abuse happens in shadows, targeting our most vulnerable population, people who often can't speak for themselves anymore. That's why I'm sharing this story. If you have a loved one in long-term care, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Ask questions. Demand answers. Request copies of medical records. Visit at unexpected times. Talk to the staff, the janitors, the maintenance workers, the people who see what really happens when families aren't watching. And to anyone working in these facilities who sees abuse happening, please, I beg you, be like Carmen. Document it, report it, risk speaking up. Yes, there might be consequences, but the alternative is letting innocent people suffer and die when they're at their most vulnerable. Mother is 82 now, reading mystery novels in her sunny apartment, planning a trip to visit my sister in Vancouver next spring. She should never have been that close to losing everything. None of those 12 people should have suffered the way they did. Patricia Chen should still be alive. The system failed them all. But one janitor with a camera phone and the courage to slip a note into a stranger's hand, that changed everything, that saved lives. Sometimes the heroes don't wear capes or badges. Sometimes they wear coveralls and clean toilets and risk deportation to do the right thing. Sometimes they're just people who refuse to stay silent when they witness injustice. I think about that every day. I think about how close I came to signing those papers, to trusting authority over instinct, to prioritizing politeness over my mother's safety. I think about Carmen's shaking hands as she showed me those photos in that cramped supply closet, risking everything because she couldn't watch one more person suffer. The most important lesson I learned from this nightmare is simple. Trust your gut, ask hard questions, and never, ever assume that professional credentials or expensive facilities guarantee good care. Love and vigilance, those are what protect our vulnerable elders, not titles or marble lobbies or premium price tags. And if someone whispers a warning to you, if someone risks themselves to tell you something is wrong, listen. Listen with everything you have, because they might be saving a life. My mother's life was worth listening.